Welcome back to Unit 4. And in this unit, we want to wrap up our discussion of this unit by having a look at the role of the central bank and its impact on the economy. So in order to start things off proper, let us begin with a definition of the central bank. And we are saying that the central bank is going to be some financial institution and it's going to be that financial institution that is going to regulate, so that regulates the country's, let me say, the monetary system of a country, while trying to keep the economy stable. So that is essentially the role of the central bank. All right, good. So continuing along that same vein, the question that we want to consider as well, how does the central bank achieve this? How do they regulate the monetary system, and how do they keep things stable? And they do that by leveraging what are known as expansionary measures or contractionary measures. And for ease of reference, we're going to say that expansionary means we want to increase spending within the economy, whereas contractionary means we want to reduce spending within the economy. And in order to make sense of this, or to put this into context, then we must speak about the concept of inflation. So what is inflation? So inflation is the general rise in prices over time. So it's a general, well, sustained is an important word, so let me add that. It's a general sustained rise in prices over time. As mentioned, the key word here is that it is sustained. So it's not a one-off thing and then things go back to normal. It's over time, and it's the pattern that has been shown over time. So that's inflation. We also have the concept, though, of deflation, which in converse is the general sustained drop or fall in prices over time. Now, I want to put it to you, or I want you to contemplate on the fact that both extremes are bad. We don't want to have high inflation, and we don't want to have extremely low inflation or deflation. What we want to do, based on what has been stated in the role of the central bank, is that we want to keep the economy stable. So stability is the thing that we are going for. And if we just think about it in layman terms, it's going to be important because if prices are rising over time, especially drastically, then it means that people find it hard to plan their financial affairs. So the firms, for example, are not going to know how to best allocate their resources in terms of investment, in terms of building out capacity, because prices are rising, which means that the cost to get these capital goods or the cost to pay workers is going to keep on increasing. And this is going to force some of the firms to go out of business because firms are in the marketplace to make profits. So anything that is going to make that more difficult, then it's going to create a situation in which firms are going to be exiting the space. On the other hand, if prices are falling too rapidly, then a similar kind of concern is going to be leveraged. Because what it means is that people are going to want to buy more. And as people start to buy more, then over time it means that the prices are going to go up again and the supply is going to be decreased. The supply of goods and services is going to be decreased because it cannot keep in equilibrium with the demand that is being seen within the economy. So what we are saying here is that governments are going to make use of, the central bank is going to make use of the expansionary measures and contractionary measures. Now, let us have a look at the monetary policies which are usually employed by the central bank. And these monetary policies are going to be aligned to what we have defined as the role of the central bank. So one thing, let me use a different ink here. So one thing that is going to happen in terms of the monetary policies is that the central bank is going to try and make use of moral suasion. And this is where they are going to facilitate communication with the commercial banks. So facilitates communication with commercial banks. And let me just write CM. So that's commercial banks to regulate their behavior. And this next part is important because they want to regulate their behavior without the use of force. So they don't want to have to be using legal means to achieve compliance. And that's why it's called moral suasion. Trying to have the communication, trying to give the rationale as to why things must be done in a particular way so that it can benefit all members within the society. So moral suasion is going to be one of the monetary policies that is going to be leveraged by the central bank. Another thing that we will find that the central bank is going to do is that they are going to set the interest rates. And remember, what we are saying here is that these policies are going to be done to either increase spending within the economy or to reduce spending within the economy. And the manipulation of interest rates provides a mechanism through which this can be achieved. It's important to note that there are two interest rates which are of importance to us. So there is something known as the discount rate, and there is something known as the reserve ratio. And these are rates which are being used. Now for the discount rate, this is the percent at which the commercial banks will borrow. And borrow from who? They are borrowing from the central bank. So remember, the central bank is going to be that bank that keeps the accounts of the commercial banks and also of the government. Now, the reserve ratio is going to be the percentage of deposits that the commercial banks will have to keep. So remember, the commercial banks exist and make money primarily because they are facilitating loans. Now, whenever the householders make a deposit into the commercial bank, then the commercial bank is going to turn around and try and lend out that money so that it can earn interest or rates on those funds which are loaned out. However, the central bank is going to impose a limit on the percentage of that deposit that can actually be loaned out. And this becomes important because we have to look at the concept of the money multiplier. So the money multiplier let's call that M, is going to be equal to 1 over the reserve ratio. So for example, given that the reserve ratio is 20%, then what this means is that 20% of the deposit has to be kept by the bank. And therefore, it implies that the bank can only lend out 80% of that fund. Now, in terms of finding the money multiplier, this is going to be equal, in this case, to 1 over 0.2. And whenever you do the computations, just dragging up a calculator. So 1 divided by 0.2 is equal to 5. So this equals 5. And this 5 is going to be a multiplier that tells us the total deposits that are going to be generated within the economy based on the initial deposit. So to make this more concrete, let's assume that there is an initial deposit. So there's an initial deposit of, let's say, $1,000. And remember, we are saying that the reserve ratio is equal to 20%. Then as we have just computed, 1 over 0.2 is equal to 5. And 5 is going to be that money multiplier. Therefore, the total deposits which are going to be generated by this initial deposit over time is going to be equal to 5, which is the multiplier, times the $1,000, which is going to be equal to $5,000. Now, interestingly, we can now determine what the amount of credit is that has been generated by this initial deposit. And we are saying credit because remember, the person deposits $100 based on the reserve ratio. The bank that gets this $1,000 is required to hold 20% of that, which is going to be $200. So 20% of the 1,000 is going to be $200. And what this means, therefore, is that there is $800 that can be lent out by this bank. So this $800, when it is lent out by the bank, it becomes credit to the person who has borrowed it. So in terms of the economy, we have $800 credit that has been created. So this is going to go into a new account as a deposit, a loan into that account. So we are saying that when this happens over time, because this $800, once it drops into an account, then the bank that holds that money now has to store 20% of that. And if the bank that receives it stores 20% of that, then we are going to have 800 times 0.2, which is 20%. It means that it's going to hold on to 160. And therefore, by holding on to 160, it means that 800 minus 160, it leaves 640 available for loans. So this 640 is then going to be loaned out to somebody else, and the cycle continues. So we are saying that when that entire cycle continues, and we look at all of the money that has been deposited, including the $1,000, then the total deposits is going to be equal to $5,000. That's what we're saying. So to compute the credit that has been generated, because remember, this is credit. Well, let me put the initial deposit of $1,000 there. I think that will make it a bit clearer. So the $1,000 plus the 800 plus the 640 plus whatever is going to add up to be $5,000 in total. And so what we want to do is to determine how much credit has been created. Now, the initial deposit is not credit. That is going to be used to facilitate credits going down the line. So it therefore means that the credits are going to be accumulated from the 800 going downwards. And what we now want to do is to find out how much credit has been generated in this scenario. And to do that, we simply say total deposits minus the initial deposit. And I think you can see from the diagram that the initial deposit is included inside the 5,000. So we want to get rid of that. So therefore, the amount of credit that is created is equal to the total deposits minus the initial deposit. So it's equal to 5,000 minus that initial deposit of 1,000. So the total amount of credit that can be created in this scenario would be a total of $4,000. So this is money that is actually credited to others via loans based on the reserve policy that has been implemented or instituted by the central bank. So monetary policy is one, they can use moral suasion. Two, they can set the interest rates. And three, they can operate on the open market. So we call this open market operations. And these open market operations are going to be designed to, once again, either to increase spending or to reduce spending. Because remember, that is what the central bank is trying to do to keep things stable. So on one hand, we have already spoken about things like interest rates. So in terms of the open market operations, the primary thing is going to be you either sell securities or you buy securities. And we are looking at this from the standpoint of the central bank. So if the central bank is purchasing securities, let me change this to another color. So if the central bank is buying securities, then what this pretty much means is that they are reducing so if they are selling the securities, then what it means is that they are offering up things, and by virtue of offering up things to the marketplace, they are going to be reducing the money supply. So let me change this. The reducing is at the wrong place. So when they sell, they are going to be reducing the money supply. Because it means that investors and the commercial banks and whoever else is interested are going to want to buy these securities, like bonds, for example. We spoke about bonds before. And if they purchase these bonds, if the commercial banks and investors purchase these banks, then what this is doing is it's taking money out of circulation. So we are reducing the money supply by selling securities. If, on the other hand, they are going to buy securities, so for example, government issues bonds, these bonds go to the commercial banks, and the central bank turns around and buys these securities, then what it means is that they are going to be increasing the supply of money. Because the money that they actually use to purchase these securities are now going to go into the commercial banks. And by virtue of the reserve policy, then there's going to be a certain amount of credit that the commercial banks can now have at their disposal to lend out to others. And so by manipulating these open market operations, the central bank is trying to keep things stable within the economy. So just to wrap up, let's just concisely indicate what are some of the functions of the central bank, and let us use three things to denote what they are trying to accomplish. And one is they are trying to control money supply. Two, they are trying to regulate the commercial banks. And 3, they're going to be acting as the government's bankers. And what we really mean by this is that the governments are going to keep their accounts at the central bank, and the transactions which are being recorded against these different accounts are going to be reflected right there in the central bank. All right, so I think this now wraps it up and takes care of the monetary policies and the role of the central bank. And I had given you a resource in terms of the CAPE review book, etc. So I'm asking you to just have a look in it now and use it to compare what I have done in these 2 lectures and to assist in your preparation. So the final unit that we are going to be looking at is the unit that deals with, foreign trade. So please stay tuned for that and take care.